Could Mark Vientos be the next version of Pete Alonso for the New York Mets? I'm going to talk about that on today's episode of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Locked On Mets is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Now, on today's show, we have a Friday farm report, although I am flying solo this week. But what I want to discuss is what could Mark Vientos mean for the Mets next season? Could he have a similar breakout to Pete Alonso in 2019? I'm not saying 53 home runs, but could he burst onto the scene and be a starting player for the Mets who can provide a ton of power? I actually think he can. In the first segment, I'm going to compare those two players, Alonso and Vientos, go through Pete's numbers in his final season in the minor leagues, compare that to Mark Vientos this past season. Then in the second segment, I want to talk about the defensive liabilities with both of these players, how that is another similarity, and how we should not count out Vientos improving the same way that we've seen Alonso improve over at first base. Then finally, in the last segment, I'm going to look at the Mets roster for this upcoming season. Where does Mark Vientos fit into their plans as we get closer to seeing his MLB debut? Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing about the Mets and about baseball at justbaseball.com. So Pete Alonso was an absolute game breaker in 2018. His numbers are ridiculous if you dive through them. I mean, in 65 games played at AA, he hit 314, a 440 on base percentage, a 573 slugging percentage, 15 home runs, 52 RBIs, a 180 WRC plus, which again measures hitters based on a league average of 100. So a 180 weighted runs created plus means Pete Alonso was 80% better than your league average hitter in AA that year. He then went to AAA, hit 260, a 355 on base, 585 slugging with 21 home runs, 67 RBIs, and a 139 WRC plus. Altogether, 36 home runs, 119 RBIs. That is big shoes to fill for Mr. Mark Vientos, and obviously he didn't put up those numbers, but he also didn't play as many games as Pete this season. So still, you look at what he did, and it's really impressive. And also, I do want to note that Pete Alonso was 23 in 2018. Mark Vientos, 21 years old. So a little bit different stages of their development. Mark Vientos had to jump from low A to AA based on Brett Baty being in the system and wanting to keep those two guys separate, both playing third base to start the year. And he missed that year of development due to COVID in 2020, where he would have played high A and maybe had gotten that jump up to AA by the end of the year. So the Mets trusted Vientos enough to just rush that development, throw him in AA. He struggled to start, only hit 3 home runs in that first month, but then found his footing and was outstanding. Altogether in AA, he hit 281, a 346 on base percentage, and a 580 slugging percentage, hit 22 home runs, had 62 RBIs, and a 144 WRC plus. He then goes up to AAA at the end of the year, only gets 11 games played, but hit 278, a 395 on base percentage, 583 slugging percentage, 3 home runs in those 11 games, bringing his season total to 25. Now, as I mentioned before, Pete Alonso was a more polished player in 2018 than Vientos was in 2021. He had played 378 games, and you factor in his college career and his professional career in the minor leagues leading into that season, whereas Vientos, because he lost 2020 and got drafted out of high school, didn't have any college playing time, obviously. He had only played 222 games in his career leading into this season. So you're talking about 150 extra games that Alonso had played since high school than Vientos had. And you look at their numbers, and while Alonso's were certainly better, certainly a more accomplished player, again, he was someone that was able to really dominate those leagues where he was one of the older players in those leagues. So that's the difference there. And when I look at these two players, the thing that just jumps out to me comparing them in these seasons is Mark Vientos had a 581 slugging percentage this year. And that's taking double A and triple A. What do you think Pete Alonso, with all of those home runs, what do you think his slugging percentage was in 2018 before he ended up making his debut in 2019 and had the rookie home run record and set all of those marks, led the league in RBIs, all-star, all that great stuff? Well, that season, Pete Alonso's slugging percentage was 579, 2 points lower than Mark Vientos. I'm not saying Vientos is better by any stretch at all. But what I am saying is when it comes to incredible pop, Mark Vientos is a lot closer to Pete Alonso than you may think. And that leads me to believe that he can have a huge impact on the 2022 Mets. The only problem is finding a position he can play in the field. That is what's holding him back right now. But that's also what we said about Pete Alonso after the 2018 season. So I want to compare them again in the next segment when it comes to the defense and how Vientos can learn from Alonso and how he can stake a claim to be on this Mets roster as soon as opening day. This holiday season, grab the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar or even better, and that is Built Bar, which is filled with so much holiday goodness, rich with decadent flavors, covered in chocolate, but amazingly low in calories, sugar, net carbs, and fat, while still high in protein. You get the best of both worlds, delicious and healthy. Built Bar gives you that extra fuel you need to bust down those mall doors and battle all the holiday shoppers, or you're just standing in an endless line. Built Bar can give you that extra something you need to keep going. So throw one in your jacket or purse. You never know when you're going to need it. And like some of the other marshmallowy treats you can find around the holidays, there is something special this year with Built Bar Puffs. They're light, they're fluffy, they're marshmallowy through and through with different flavors, all covered in chocolate. Tastes so good, you won't believe it. They're also filled with protein. There is so much Built Bar has to offer during the holiday season. And if you want to try them today, go to built.com where you can use the promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. Stance Apparel represents a radical reinvention of socks, underwear, and active apparel with a sharp focus on comfort, quality, and creativity. They bring an atypical aesthetic alongside some of pop culture's hottest collaborations, creating the ultimate in-style form of self-expression, because everything you wear should be a direct extension of who you are and how you feel. And boy, will you feel great when you put on Stance Apparel. When I got some in the mail, I was just blown away about how comfortable this apparel was with the socks, the underwear, the shirts, and they have just incredible designs, whether you're a fan of Batman, Star Wars, The Office, Major League Baseball, the NBA, so much more. I just couldn't help myself. When I saw a pair of my favorite Christmas movie, I saw a pair of socks with Elf on it. I had to get those for the holiday season. Here's what you want to do if you want to try Stance today. Register for an account at stance.com and you're going to get 15% off your first purchase by using the promo code Locked On at checkout. Enjoy the color and comfort of a life less ordinary with Stance. So the first thing I want to do as we get into talking about the defense between Mark Vientos and Pete Alonso is just go to Baseball America and pull up the scouting report for each of these guys. Obviously, Alonso, the scouting report heading into the 2019 season when he was the Mets' number 2 overall prospect. I can't remember who was number 1. Was it Ronnie Mauricio or Andres Jimenez? I don't remember exactly, but regardless, Pete Alonso probably should have been, considering the rookie year he would have. But let's start with Mark Vientos and this latest scouting report that just got put up by Baseball America, where they have him as the number 4 prospect heading into the 2022 season. They say Vientos has massive raw power that can reach the deepest recesses of left field. His swing is geared to do damage in the air, and he could take the ball out to all fields. The majority of his home runs in 2021 were hit to right field. Vientos has improved his pitch recognition, especially against breaking stuff from right-handers, And after catching up to the speed at AA, he compiled a OPS over 1,000 in his final 60 games. He doesn't flinch at velocity, could become a near average hitter with plus power. Drafted as a shortstop, Vientos shifted to third base as a pro. He is playable there and has a plus arm. Some scouts believe his thick lower half could force him to first base, but Vientos has shown a renewed focus on conditioning this offseason. He tried his hand at left field, but rival scouts are unconvinced. They say Vientos is a competitive player who carries a chip on his shoulder for not being widely viewed in the same tier as the Mets' other top position prospects. He has a chance to change perceptions because his MLB debut is on deck for 2022. If he hits at AAA, he could become a fixture on an infield corner. So what you hear there is, for one, a scout that's actually higher on his defense than I've seen a lot of others, saying that he's playable at third base. We haven't always seen that. We've seen a lot of other people come out with scouting reports where they say he just doesn't have a position, destined to be a DH, all the same things we heard about Pete Alonso. And going through his scouting report, I'm not going to dive too much into how they talked about how awesome he was offensively. They said he was a polarizing prospect for scouts because of his strengths and weaknesses, which were so pronounced. And here's where they got to the weaknesses. Defense is Alonso's bugaboo. I love that phrasing, a bugaboo, and has become his developmental focus point. Hard hands and limited mobility at first place turn some routine plays into adventures, but he scoops throws from infielders well. He must keep working to become even adequate defensively. Then they say Alonso is an American League player in a National League organization. His bat should create significantly more runs than his glove allows, and he will be big league ready early in 2019. And sure was he, winning that Rookie of the Year. But what we've seen is hard work on your defense can pay off. And Pete Alonso has become, if nothing worse, a league average defensive first baseman, at times above average. He really has improved every single year, particularly in 2021. If you remember, you go back into my podcast files here, there was a point in, I want to say, August, where he was leading, or he was maybe just behind Anthony Rizzo when it came to the outs above average leaderboard at first base. I mean, he was in contention at that time for a Gold Glove. Obviously, didn't get that recognition. I think the numbers did come back to the pack a bit for Alonso, but what he has shown is, if you're committed enough, defense can improve. What you can't teach is 40 home run pop. That's what you can't teach. You can't just develop that. You can get some pop over time. You can focus on your launch angle and who knows. But that raw power, a lot of that is just what players are naturally gifted with. And Mark Vientos and Pete Alonso have that. But the defense can be improved upon. And the one thing that Vientos has is a cannon of an arm. So if he does play third base, that arm should help him. And obviously the lack of range, not having the softest of hands, these are things he has to work on. But if he devotes his entire offseason to playing third base or even playing left field, and he comes into spring training and he rakes and he's playing those positions and he's showing that he's not a liability, he's going to push for a spot on this roster the same way Pete Alonso won a job in spring training in 2019. And we don't know what the new CBA is going to have in store when it comes to service time manipulation. That might not be a thing anymore. There might not be an incentive to stash Vientos in the minors for a couple of weeks to start the season. And so if he does get to that point where the defense is passable, I look at his bat, and we can go through, and we'll go through in the next segment, who's going to be on this roster next year. There might not be anyone with more upside in that DH role than Mark Vientos. There might not be anyone with more upside at third base offensively than Mark Vientos. If there is a possibility that he just hits the ground running and Eduardo Escobar has to shift to second base, you do what you got to do to get some pop in this lineup. Because right now, if you're looking at what the Mets have currently on the roster, it's a lot of high on base percentage guys, which is great, but the power department is lacking a bit. You got Pete Alonso, you got Eduardo Escobar, and then you got Francisco Lindor, who's got pop as well. But across this lineup, Mark Canha, sure, maybe he'll run into 20 home runs. If you're lucky, 25. Doubt it, but he might. Starlin Marte, kind of the same thing. He has more pop than Canha, but still not necessarily a home run threat. You know what Nimmo's going to bring you. It's more about getting on base than the home runs. Jeff McNeil, same thing. So you look at this roster, and I do think that they're missing some pop. And I see JD Davis, and that's what we're really going to be talking about in the next segment, because his profile and Vientos' profile is very similar as guys with bad gloves who are going to bring you that pop from the right side. But JD just hasn't been hitting home runs. Mark Vientos is a guy that can legitimately hit 25, 30 home runs over a full season. He just did it in the minor leagues. That has to translate up at the big league level, but he did that in, I believe, less than 100 games. He had, I think it was 72 games played in AA and 11 in AAA. So you give him a full slate of at-bats, and I'm just really intrigued by the potential of this prospect who, and the bat, it's right there. It's almost ready. It might be ready right now. He just had a season in the minor leagues where he was slugging at a 581 clip. That's ridiculous. That pop, it's so rare to have a prospect develop where you just know if this guy gets at bats at the big league level, he's going to leave the yard a ton. You just don't always know which guys are going to translate that way. And I feel like Mark Vientos is becoming that prospect where you're trying to find that place for him, but you're not focusing enough on his strength. You're focusing so much on the weaknesses, so much on where he can play defensively, that you might be missing the thing you should be paying attention to the most, which is that if you're trying to build out a lineup next season, Mark Vientos might be this source of power that you just can't find anywhere else right now. If you go to free agency, yeah, sure, you can still sign Chris Bryant or Trevor Story, but you're going to be tied to years with those guys. You don't know how they're even going to fit your roster long term, particularly with Chris Bryant and some of the defensive liabilities I pointed out. I believe it was last Friday at this point in that episode where I talked about Bryant and Jose Ramirez. Yeah, I just look at what is available to the Mets currently. And if you're looking at the farm, this is the bat that is right there to be inserted in that lineup at some point next season. And the impact he can have on this offense is enough that I would give him every opportunity to crack this roster in spring training. That's just the way I feel about it. I'm going to talk about that more in just a minute because I think this is the reason why JD Davis has to be traded this offseason. BetOnline has you covered all season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as the football season continues to march towards the playoffs. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. Head to their new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit just by using the promo code Locked On. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. Bet online, where the game starts. All right, so looking at the Mets roster heading into next season, the thing that is fascinating to me is there's still this push amongst fans for them to go out and add another big bat, sign Chris Bryant. Here's the thing. They're already in a roster crunch. They're going to have to clear out some bats if they want to add another bat because right now, as presently constructed, this team's full. If you look at the starting lineup as expected with Canna, Nimmo, Marte in the outfield and infield of Eduardo Escobar, Francisco Lindor, Jeff McNeil, and Pete Alonso, James McCann behind the plate. You're going to have a 5-man bench if you have an 8-man bullpen. So you're looking at Robinson Cano, Dominic Smith, JD Davis. You need to have a backup shortstop, right? So that would be Louis Guillorme. And then you need a backup catcher, Tomas Nido. So right there, full team. Not even having room for a Khalil Lee or a Nick Plummer to be another backup center fielder. And the interesting thing about that, the more I thought about it today, because Nemo, Marte, and Can are interchangeable in the outfield, because all of them could play center, the Mets probably won't have a traditional fourth outfielder on this roster unless they clear out Dominic Smith and JD Davis. I think at this point, Dominic Smith is your fourth outfielder, knowing that if one of those guys goes down with an injury, sorry, something in my throat. If that happens and somebody who has gone down a lot goes down again, Dominic Smith slides into left field and you still have Mark Canna and Starling Marte out there. So if that's what happens, or if either of the other guys gets hurt, I think that's where you're going right now. And that's when you could see a Khalil Lee or a Nick Plummer. But that just solves one problem. how does Mark Vientos get on this roster? That's the question. Or how do you have room for Chris Bryant if the Mets were to make that big signing that everyone wants right now? You're going to have to trade Dominic Smith and JD Davis to accomplish that, or at least one of them to add another impact bat. Even if the Mets wanted to reunite with Jonathan VR, I mean, the only thing that you could do there is if you sign the VR, he can at least back up Lindor at short. So at least that would solve one of those issues. And Guillorme, I guess, would have to be, the one that has to get sent down or DFA'd. He does have an option at least still, but that's pretty rough for him. Regardless, this is a team that has a roster crunch. And with that, how do you insert that impact back? To me, the clearest path to maybe adding a high upside home run threat in this roster is to trade JD Davis and open the door for Mark Vientos to make this team out of camp. That's what makes the most sense to me, because as much as JD Davis had a pretty good offensive season, he hit 285. That slugging percentage was 436. And here's the thing that's really alarming to me. If you look at the last two seasons, 2020 and 2021, JD Davis has 440 plate appearances. How many home runs do you think he has hit in his last 440 plate appearances? 11. Only 11 home runs. He is not getting the ball in the air enough anymore, and that is a problem when you need some home run threats on this roster. And the 1 year where he hit the home runs was 2019, the juice ball season. Yeah, he had 22 that year. That was great, but I don't know if he's ever hit 22 home runs again. I think the only way is if he gets 600 plate appearances, and I don't see that happening with the Mets, because I actually trust Mark Vientos defensively at third base more than JD Davis, because nothing can be worse than JD Davis in all those double clutches. So, look, when it comes to constructing this team, yes, you could go out and you could sign Chris Bryant. You could trade Jeff McNeil, JD Davis, and Dominic Smith, clear out your roster, infuse it with some young talent, bring up event. That's a lot of moves you can make. And maybe that's what the Mets do. Maybe they stay active. Maybe they're still going to be wheeling and dealing. But the one thing you could do is you could simply trade JD Davis, get anything for him. Honestly, I would DFA JD Davis. That's a hot take that I've had. It just, for me, it's not that JD's a bad player. It's really not. And I know it seems like I always come down hard on him. And I know because he hits for a high average and he is at times a really good hitter for the Mets, fans still do appreciate JD Davis. But for me, my problem is he gets in the way. He's getting in the way of a Mark Vientos. In the past, because you have him, you don't give Guillorme the playing time that maybe he deserves, because you're just searching for that offense. And so you say, all right, we're going to throw JD out there because, hey, he can carry us offensively. And maybe he goes 2 for 4. But then he also doesn't make a play on a grounder that lets an inning continue, and the Mets give up 4 runs. I feel like, going back to that scout report on Pete Alonso where they said, he's going to give you more runs than he's going to give up. I feel like that's the opposite with JD. I feel like, yeah, the offense is great when it's there, but he doesn't produce enough to overcome the defensive liability, especially because he's not hitting home runs. I look at Mark Vientos, and he doesn't even have to break camp with the team, but at some point this season, he's going to be big league ready. And I would rather give 350 plate appearances to Mark Vientos next season than JD Davis, especially with the fact that he has the chip on his shoulder. And I believe that he can improve defensively. I don't think that just because a guy hasn't looked great as a 21-year-old in the minor leagues in the middle of their development, that means that they can't become an average defensive player. And because he has a really big arm, whether that's played out in right field or at third base, he could bring some value to the Mets. And if he's hitting home runs, that is going to mean so much to this team. So if I were to build out a bench for opening day with what is currently on the roster, I'd be moving JD Davis or just cutting him to give Mark Vientos that spot. And then your bench has some pop from both sides with Dom and Cano from the left side, with Mark Vientos from the right side. You have Nito as your backup catcher and Guillorme as your backup shortstop for the defense. To me, that is what makes the most sense what the Mets currently have. And overall, my point is I look at Mark Vientos and a guy who just slugged 581 in his hopeful final season in the minor leagues. Probably will get some time in AAA next year, but I look at that pop and I look at what Pete Alonso's trajectory was in his final season in the minors, and I just think you have to leave the door open for a bat like that to make the team. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, that was this week's Farm Report. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. Get your daily picks, blowout specials, wrong team favorite picks, and Lee Sterling's lock of the day by following Locked On Bets wherever you get podcasts.